Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so very much. That was a really wonderful presentation, very well thought out. And I'm a little bit older, so I don't know about the 1940s, but I certainly remember the 1960s because I was in college then, and feminism, and I wasn't Muslim at the time either. So I want to mention a couple of different things. First of all, the concept of feminism is a paradigm that is outside of Islam. Now, I'm not against women's rights. What I'm saying is feminism, the way the West understands it, like so many other things they don't get about Islam, it's a paradigm. And so we also have to develop our own paradigm of what women's rights are that Allah has given us in the Quran, because a lot of the patriarchy, not whether men should be ruling over the family or whatever, or society, but a lot of the patriarchy we see in the world has nothing to do with Islam, has to do with what's happened over the centuries historically. Secondly, and I want to make just several different points and maybe ask you to comment on it. Women in many countries where it's a 3-generation family can easily work because they don't have to worry about babysitting because grandma's there, grandpa's there, aunts and uncles are there, and so on. And I've seen this in India with my husband's family. Women can go work because they don't have to worry about the children. And their contributions, it's very different from the pressure that women feel here, because you come home, your child's been taken care of, so you don't have to worry about a bad babysitter. And someone has cooked the food. So, all the things that put pressure on women here when they work are taken care of through a 3-generation family. There was something else I wanted to say, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And as I heard Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad say, that a lot of Islamic law that refers to the family is difficult to understand outside of the context of the extended family that would be the Islamic norm. So that's absolutely true that we have a unique circumstance where families are operating mother, father, children, and that does put a lot of burden on women. So thank you for making those points.
I'll just elaborate a little bit more so you understand the context. Because oh gosh, the senior moment has just plagued me. It is a plague. I'll come back.
Outside of the Muslim feminism outside. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to ask you, I'm very politically involved, okay? I was national delegate for 2 years, and so I'm very involved with the Democratic Party in the past. And the Democrat Party has gotten very liberal, okay? So the idea that you have up there in regards to pro-choice, I understand that how your explanation is about feminism and how that doesn't align with our beliefs. In the political sphere, what I have had to deal with is people will ask me these questions because I'm politically involved and I'm a woman who wears a hijab, and the non-Muslims will ask me this question and say, well, but do you believe in pro-choice? And this is my answer to them, and I don't think I'm being wrong as a Muslim to say this when I say yes, because as I would not want them to push their religion on me, I don't push my religion on them. What I tell them is, I would never do an abortion because that's not part of my faith. But if that's what you need to do because of whatever circumstances, sometimes, like right now, the Republican Party is against abortion, even in incest, even in rape. And these are rights that are being taken away from women in circumstances that they should be able to control. That's my first issue. The second issue is the Republican Party also does not allow to take care of these children that are unwanted to parents, okay? They're on, I've dealt with kids in school where they're neglected because their parents were addicts or they couldn't afford the child and they had to keep it for whatever religious reasons, because I was in Utah, so a lot of Mormons do not do abortions. So anyways, the point is that wrong? Because I've had some male Muslims point out to me, but that's not part of our religion. And what I tell them is, and and often it's their girlfriends, their Anglo girlfriends asking me these questions, okay? And they'll say, well, how can you say that? You know that we don't believe in pro-choice. And yet I think that it's not right for me not to, because they have ownership of their body, which is what you went over. And I'm not their keeper. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, if they're Muslim. And if they're not, I'm still not their keeper. So I just want you to clarify, why is that particular idea not something that I can maybe say?
Well, I mean, clearly, anyone who's involved in politics and many other fields, right? Probably anywhere where you're dealing with non-Muslims, specifically progressives, then you're in a difficult predicament. But I think that as Muslims, we've taken on this idea, this principle that is very American, very Western, that religion is personal. And Allahu Alam, I absolutely don't believe that is what Islam tells us to do. That is our Islamic way. We believe in what we believe because it's true, not because it's personally, I choose to follow Islam, but if you want to be Buddhist, that's great. Like, no, we believe Islam because it's true. And so what you say is different from what you believe, right? So I'm going off of what we believe. That do we have ownership of our body? Well, no, not absolutely. We can't kill ourselves, right? So if someone was going to say, my life is terrible, I want to kill myself, we wouldn't say, in part because it's not socially acceptable to say, we wouldn't say, well, it's your choice. I don't believe in suicide, but if you want to kill yourself, that's on you. So I think we have to realize that in part that is because of the society we believe in, what we choose to say or believe, and it's almost as if it aligns with popular society, then we're more than willing. If someone said, well, I want to kill myself, we'd probably say, no, get help, don't do that. But if someone says, I want an abortion, because we live in a society that believes in pro-choice, then we say, well, that's your choice, I wouldn't want to do it, but that's on you. As Muslims, we also have to develop deeper thought on this issue. So again, we don't just not believe in abortion in an absolute sense because we just don't believe in it. We have to better understand the deeper reasons. What about the sacredness of life, right? What about that life being created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you don't own that life? What about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, do not kill your children out of fear of poverty? And that's a lot of the reason. I don't know if it's majority, but that's a significant portion of why women kill their children, have abortions. So what are you going to actually say? That's a difficult question to answer. But again, I see and I admire Catholics in some way, the Catholics in our society, because they're very, not all of course, but a lot of them are very straightforward about their belief, but they've also sort of developed a deeper philosophy so that they can explain, well, why is life sacred? And here's also some of the science, and here's why I believe what I believe, and not simply, well, that's just what I believe, right? So I don't know, maybe it's better to just avoid these conversations. In the end, is it a personal choice in terms of the state? Well, it is. So you wouldn't necessarily be wrong in saying, well, it is your personal choice if your intent is saying that it is your personal choice according to the society we live in, according to the current laws. But do we believe just a personal choice as Muslims? Well, no, we don't. So maybe there is the aspect of intention there is also important. In Allah.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I'm so sorry I was late. I had something that I had to do, so I'm bummed that I'm so grateful to be able to get alhamdulillah, I'm grateful to be able to get a chance to hear you speak. And thank you for your thoughts. I really appreciate your critique and your analysis and your insights. I've read some of your work. I've gone to your website, watched your Twitter feed, and actually commented on some of your tweets and researched your references and your papers, and I've really kind of like looked at your work extensively, not extensively, but when I saw you were giving a talk, I stopped and I really looked at your work for a second. I saw the book that you submitted, that you have an essay in. I didn't read the Hadith of Aisha, but I really like to. But amazing work, and thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful for your work. So a couple of things that have occurred to me in your talk are, quick question. First of all, I'm confused about your thoughts on the separation of church and state in the United States. So you're saying, I work in mental health, and you're saying our religion trumps everything else. Our religion is, pardon the use of that word, our religion is prioritized over all other things. And I understand that on a personal level, and I know you're saying you can't separate this and the personal kind of opinion, but I'm curious about how you see living in a diverse and multicultural nation, particularly in the United States, where we have such an incredible diversity, and saying things like, our religion is ahead of everything else, and that can determine how we vote. Wondering how you see church and state separated, working into that. First question. Second is a comment, which is that I have a background in feminism, have read a lot of feminism, and was raised in a very feminist household. And I love your work, and I say this with the utmost respect and care for you as a scholar, as an academic, and as a thinker, and want to contribute to your work as a sister and as a teacher. That making, and you did acknowledge this, and I want to say I did hear you acknowledge it, but making statements about feminism with that kind of blanket inclusion of so many strands of thought is really, really dangerous, I think. And you run the risk of losing, I think, some of your more really vital points about women's rights and gender wars, because you're making blanket statements. And the final thing I'll say, I have to try and make this quick. Another comment I have, and I'd really like to hear your comment on this, is your use of the word patriarchy equates it with father rule. But I think that's a misunderstanding of a traditional kind of, again, feminist critique. Our feminist is really diverse, but a feminist critique of patriarchy, which is patriarchy from a Christian perspective, which is that men dominate women and dominate nature. And it's not about father rule per se as perceived in Islam. So I have argued for a long time that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was not a patriarchal person. He did not believe in patriarchy, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He did not believe in patriarchy because he did not believe in abusing and oppressing women in nature. And talking about patriarchy and the way you're talking about it tends to, I think, misunderstand, kind of like it's a misunderstanding of the critique, which is abusing women and nature with men in power. Women can be in power and practice patriarchy by abusing weak and powerless people. So the critique of patriarchy is about dominance and abuse, not about men. So understanding that is really critical, I think, to deconstructing societal problems, especially in terms of women. And the last thing I'll say, I think I've lost it. I think I'll stop there. I really, really appreciate your work again. I have the utmost respect for your work, and thank you so much for your contribution. Will continue to read you, and I'm looking forward to getting your book and reading your essay in that book. Thank you so much.
Okay, so okay. So I think the problem that I find with I don't know if it's feminism or feminists, is that there is often this sort of what can I say? There is often this rebuttal that feminism is many things when people critique it. And I think the problem is that, as you said, I did acknowledge that there are different strands of feminism, which is why I started with the dictionary definition, because that, at the very least, I would hope feminists agree on the dictionary definition of feminism, and then mention, sort of as an honorary mention, different strands of feminism. For one, I think when we're critiquing feminism, we are critiquing the feminism that has seeped most prominently into our society, right? So there is eco-feminism, there is liberal feminism, there are all kinds of feminism. But there's another one, I can't remember the name right now, but there's another one where they very much believed in the value of women's work. And in the talk we're doing tomorrow, I think her last name is Ferenczi, I don't completely remember, but there was a movement called Wages for Housework. And they said, why should the production of cars be more valuable than the producing of babies and having children and caring for them? So absolutely, there are different strands, and some agree with Islam more than others. However, that particular strand is not what won out. That is not what seeped into our society. So my critique of feminism is the feminism that has affected most of us. When it comes to the definition of patriarchy, I mentioned that one of the problems I see with feminism and this idea of patriarchy is exactly, I think, what you did there, is not distinctly separating what we can call good patriarchy from bad patriarchy. The idea that patriarchy is abuse and anyone can be patriarchal, Allahu alam, I think that's a stretch of the word to the point where it would almost be pointless in using it. If it's just about dominance, any group can dominate, right? So why call it patriarchy, right? But I think, again, we went to the dictionary definition there, where it's about lineage through the father and leadership of men, both in public and in the home. So if feminism is critiquing abusive patriarchy, well, who would disagree with that? But I think very often it's not only critiquing abusive patriarchy, which is why you see people saying smash the patriarchy and talking about all male panels. There's no abuse happening if there are 5 men on a panel, right? But it's about, well, why are those men sitting there? Why isn't there a woman? Why isn't there representation? Most of the men being CEOs. People also use that, talking about smashing the patriarchy and talking about men having most CEO positions. There's no abuse happening there, not inherently. Obviously, some CEOs are abusing the environment and their workers, but inherently there's no abuse there. But it's just purely about, why are there so many men there and hardly any women? So when I'm talking about feminism, again, I'm talking about what has touched most of society, but I'm also talking about what feminism actually does and fights for. So I understand your definition. At the same time, through example, it's very clear that some of them are purely talking about male leadership. Whether it's abusive, not abusive, doesn't matter. It's about male leadership, and that in and of itself being problematic, which I think is problematic. Abuse, we can separate out and say that's a problem. But I think we have to look critically as to when it's relevant to say men being in power here solely or mostly is problematic, and when it's relevant to say maybe it doesn't matter. And Allahu alam.
Assalamu alaikum once again. That senior moment passed. Hopefully I can remember what I was trying to say. It happens at around age 45. Okay. What I wanted to point out, and maybe this is underlying what you're saying as a background. We have what's called Western society, whatever that is, or Western civilization, whatever that is, and the Islamic worldview.
Yeah.
The Islamic worldview has certain moral standards that are permanent. They don't change. This is what Allah has given us in the Quran. Whereas in the Western world, what's expedient is what's done. So we may have had a rule about something a generation ago, but now it's not expedient anymore. So we now come up with something else to justify why we're going to change that rule. So the point with feminism is some of these issues that Western feminism addresses, and you're absolutely right, a lot of it is white middle class orientation, because poor women have always had to work, usually in, and at any rate. So the idea of feminism and what issues are selected from a Muslim point of view, there is a feminism within Islam, but I think we have to look at what are the issues within the Muslim world. And the fact that, for instance, a father might, I'm thinking of India, a situation I'm aware of, and many situations where women are forced to marry someone that they're absolutely dead set against marrying, because that's what the father, maybe even the mother, have decided the young woman is going to be forced to do. It's this kind of patriarchy that we should be against, because women, that's not the prophetic way. Woman has to give her consent. I don't know how much that's happening here in the US, but that's just one example. But I'm thinking we have to have a feminism that's Quran-based, that's Islam-based, and not just take Western concepts and try to somehow push them around this way and that to kind of conform to what we think we can accept.
Okay, so you're saying we need an Islamic feminism?
Thank you. What is it, the issues within an Islamic framework that we legitimately need to correct? Because what Allah has said is there. What the Prophet ﷺ said and in the Hadith is there. But what's happened historically over the centuries that's been used to justify women staying in the house or wearing the niqab, which is completely outside of Islam. Allah says in Quran, tell the believing men, when they look at the believing women, lower their gaze. When your face is covered up, you're disobeying Allah. How can you say niqab is part of Islam? It's an upper class thing that existed in many societies historically. That's what the French, the masquerade is, the same thing. So what I'm saying is we have to look at what issues in the Islamic world, and certainly in America for Muslim women, make sense. For instance, I'll give one last example. When my kids were growing up, and this is Southern California, they always had, when they had the youth group, the girls were here, the boys were there, don't talk to each other. Oh, don't look at each other. The parents were coming from another part of the world. What happened? All those boys married non-Muslim girls because they never got a chance to talk to Muslim girls in a halal environment, in the masjid, in a public space, not two people in a room where the door is closed without the shaitan is the third party. So because of these silly rules and not understanding what the atmosphere is in America, we've gone to so many weddings and we've seen so many young people where they're not married to a Muslim because they were told, no, don't talk to each other. When you develop friendships with people, those are the kind of people you're bound to marry. That's a very specific example that a lot of very wonderful Muslim women in their 30s and 40s can't find husbands because the men went somewhere else.
I think it's I don't know. I think the idea that we need an Islamic feminism, in one sense, I could say, well, why do we need an Islamic feminism, right? If we know that these issues aren't rooted in Islam, why don't we just need to return to Islam? If it is truly rooted in Islam, is it necessarily problematic? Maybe not. Maybe if it was, Islamic minimalism and Islamic environmentalism, and I don't know. Maybe those things aren't inherently problematic. But I would question if we truly believe, which we should as Muslims, that these issues are not an outpouring of Islam itself, but actually of our not following Islam, then why wouldn't we simply turn back to Islam? And why do we need to give it a new title and attach it to feminism? What would the benefit be? Rhetorical question.
Sister, Assalamu alaikum. So we talked about feminism from like a academic level, political level, conceptual level, like brass tacks, like at a family, personal level. Like I've talked to a lot of Muslim men, and it's very rare when I talk to men that they find like a hardcore feminist, let's say, a feminist female, very attractive. Like it's difficult, home life, family life, etc. And I'm just wondering if the opposite is also true, right? Like as a female, having kind of a more feminine male husband is attractive or equally unattractive.
You can take a poll.
What I guess what I was saying when I've talked to other Muslim men about what is unattractive is about I guess kind of the word you had up there before about the boogeyman, like how like everything is the man's fault because that like that.
Right. Yeah, well, I think this is one of the ironies, right, that we somewhat touched on, where there has been such an emphasis on women succeeding in career, in school, but then there is this sort of strange irony now of men falling behind in both of those realms of life. And so who are these women going to marry? So yeah, of course it can be difficult, and in general, the feminine attracts the masculine and vice versa. Um, so I think the answer is obvious, but I think your point is still valuable, that those women who are fighting for those feminist rights, what are the consequences within their personal relationships, and do they really and truly want the kind of man that seems to be ideal within feminism? And I think that's an ongoing conversation, but it is valuable to think about.
Assalamualaikum, sister. It's nice to see you in person. And I'm actually from Canada, and I'm just here for 1 week. And so I'm sorry if I'm not very coherent. So I'm a little jet lagged still.
What's your name?
Aisha. We're friends on Facebook. And
yes, your face looks familiar.
Yeah. And I always appreciate your input because I like to follow issues of feminism closely on social media, and often your name pops up with very, very insightful comments. So I feel very blessed and privileged to have been able to catch your thing today, because I'm only here for a week. So alhamdulillah. I wrote my question down because, again, jet lag. So I want to make sure that I was making sense. I want to say, what would you respond to the idea that wanting interests and goals outside of motherhood is a result of being like brainwashed by individualism and wanting to make a mark on the world outside of child rearing, with the understanding that child rearing is the most valuable thing a woman could contribute to society? So I feel like there's this idea, maybe also prevalent within the Muslim community, that like a man's purpose is to provide and a woman's purpose is to nurture, and that we should find like fulfillment within those roles, and that everything outside of that is like a distraction. So I think also that could play into the whole idea of like feminism being a pushback, where women for a long time felt like they didn't have that choice. Like if they wanted to go be an artist or be a writer, like something like that, it was something that was like, well, that's just a distraction from your womanly duties. So what would be a good response, or what are your thoughts on this of like, if a woman has interests, not necessarily just even like work as part of a company or anything, like just, she's not an entrepreneur, an artist or something, but she's also a mother, there's this idea of like, oh, she must be neglecting her motherly duties if she can find time for, a hobby or interest. So how would you respond to that idea?
Yeah, as Muslims, we shouldn't sort of take the other extreme, right? So we know that Muslim women have had prominent positions within our Islamic tradition, and some have even not been married or not had children. I mean, all of the Prophet's wives, except for a few, didn't have children or didn't have children from him. But quite a few didn't even have children. Our mother Aisha radiallahu anha did not have children, and we know her impact on us as Muslims. So we can't fall into the other extreme of sort of being deterministic that our only sole value as women is to get married and have children. However, as one of the sisters said, and it is a really important point, we don't live in a society that is well, obviously it's not an Islamic society, but it also doesn't even have sort of traditional sort of normative family values sort of thing. So any woman who wants to pursue a career and is married and has children has a very difficult task on her hand. And, you know, even now you see, I've been seeing a lot of feminism focus on this idea of men need to do more in the home and men need to participate more with childcare, because the older feminist idea of, oh, women can do it all is actually exhausting, is actually not, you know, positive or ideal. However, will men actually take up that slack? And again, is that actually what women want? Because there are always there are benefits, but there are also setbacks. The more a man has to do in the home, the more a man has to take on childcare, the less he can pursue in his career, the less money he will be making, maybe the more that she'll have to make. So there's always going to be sort of a positive and negative, especially when there's no outside support. But if whatever a woman wants to pursue, you know, if it's valid within Islam, of course, can be valuable. I think the Islamic consideration, however, if she does have a husband and children, is about prioritization. So if you do have young children, if you are married, that is going to be more of a priority than a career outside of the home. But that doesn't mean that you can't also pursue that. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a good point as well. I think the only difference with men is that if they're working harder, it's directly positively affecting their family. Whereas for women, even though today it can also directly positively affect their family, but it's not their obligation. So if he was to work 60 hours and that brings in more money and so they have a better lifestyle, that would be more beneficial in a sense. Like it can lean more in the man's favor to be outside of the home more because of that obligation. But still, as you said, if he has a wife and children, he also has an obligation to them. Yeah, so I'd just, you know, summarize it how I started, that we shouldn't take the other extreme of believing our only value is in being married and having children.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I really value your discussion here. I think it's such an important discussion that should be. I would have loved to have listened to this many years ago, and it would have resolved a lot of tension about working and not working, being happy being a mother, but also being pulled towards a career. So this is a fascinating and very important discussion. I do want to just say, in regards to men, as I understand it and see it, there was something that came up in your discussion too, where you mentioned that, you know, men don't feel a biological pull towards as much towards the child rearing and taking care of the children. And as you discussed over here, their role financially, I do think that we have to very much acknowledge also the importance of a man's role in helping to raise his children and being part of that family unit. And even our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hazrat Khadija supported him initially, and her role, you know, she was the one who had a financial role there. So that can be I don't want to see, this idea that a man shouldn't be involved because he just has to be the source of income. I think is unfair and also creates perhaps a tension within a marriage as well if there's too much burden on one side. I mean, it's a collaboration and a loving collaboration and respect between two people where there's a give and take. And I think each individual situation might be a little different. So I just want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and that is the blessing of Islam, that we have these ideals and foundations, but there is still a lot of room for the individual, right? So if someone was married and wanted to, the woman had a career where she wanted to pursue and be the sole breadwinner, and the man wanted to take care of the children primarily, they could, right? It's not haram to do so, even though that isn't aligned with the Islamic ideal. It may work for some individual couple.
I just wanted to ask about the equal pay issue in the feminism that you referred to. Why is it that we can't believe in that as well? Because if we're going to go work in the workforce because we choose to, and I always tell my husband, if I choose to, all the money's mine. So that what Islam gives me. So, but of course, most of us, we go to work because we want to betterment our family and help, and not put too much burden on our husband in the way of cost of living is nowadays. So my question is, why is it that we cannot believe in the fact that we should get equal pay? Because as it is, we're not getting paid at home. So why can't we ask for in the man's world that we're going into, get equal pay? And why can't we support that as a feminist?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the premise of the question. Yeah.
Can I paraphrase it? So she's asking why we cannot ask for equal pay if we are going out and working, because anyways we do not get paid at home. So, if we are making this choice of opting for a career, then why we cannot get paid for the same job that men are doing. I think she made a point why men get paid more. I think that was,
I don't remember him mentioning pay at all.
yeah.
That's interesting.
The 3 points that I remember you mentioning was
Okay.
one was work, one was the abortion, and one
Yeah.
was the sexual freedom. I'm not interested in the sexual freedom. I already addressed the abortion, okay? I just want to know about the work aspect that you were
Okay.
referring to.
Okay. So we were speaking about the consequences of this fight to work, and some of the consequences to that fight being that women now feel they have an obligation, that women now have a social, economic, have been put in a position where they feel like they have the social and economic obligation. But I believe we started by saying that, well, Allahu Alam, but the working in and of itself isn't necessarily the issue. And if you are truly working completely equal to whoever else, then I suppose you should be paid equally. It's funny because I didn't mention this, but what I've written about this topic of gender, the gender pay gap, is that the way in which it is discussed is not its reality. So the reality is not two identical people, one man, one woman, and they're getting paid differently. Any case that is happening is already against the law. What feminists are talking about, and it's been against the law since the 60s, right, the Equal Pay Act. What feminists are talking about, not the way that they put it, but when you dig into the research, is that as a group, women make less than men. Well, and I discussed this in the article that I pulled up, is that it's not a gender pay gap in terms of, again, two equal people and you're just not getting paid the same because you're a woman, but there are issues that make it difficult for women to make the same amount of money as men. So one is that there isn't, for one, universal childcare. We don't have maternity leave. We don't have on-site nurseries. So this makes it difficult for women to stay in the workforce when they have young children. and obviously the money they have to pay to daycare. Women also are more risk averse, so they don't ask for raises as much as men do. I mean, there are a couple of issues that I cited as to why there is this gender pay gap between men and women. But again, it is not as feminist presented. If you go into a job and you are literally equally qualified, equal everything, and they're paying you less because you're a woman, that's illegal. So women, what feminists are discussing, this idea of equal pay, I'm not even really sure what, well, let me not say that. So some of them have actually said, one, men also work more, slightly more. They work more overtime. So there have been some feminists who actually say we should get rid of overtime. I believe that was done at Reddit. Get rid of it because women don't work as much and that will equalize the pay gap. Well, is that just? Is that fair? Is that equality? So that particular issue, that's not a matter of whether or not it aligns with Islam. You'd have to look at it in a lot of detail and see the areas where, yes, it aligns with Islam. Of course, we believe people should be paid equally if they're truly equal, which is rare anyway, but if they're truly equal. But the details of it, that's a different issue. Should someone not be allowed to work overtime because other people don't ask for it? Is that just? So, yeah, those are my comments. I'm not sure if there was a question, but those are my comments on that issue. Right.
Just as two women may not be equal, and just as a man and woman may not.
Yeah.
But we're presuming that in similar work, men and women have equal capacity to do good work and should be paid equally.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Clarifying that point.
Well, that isn't quite what I said. My point, my conclusion is that, well, let me say, I think it is problematic to be a feminist because we cannot holistically accept it. That's not the same as saying that we don't align on every single issue. There are issues we align with, there are issues we don't. So something more innocuous, let's say like environmentalism. Can we be Muslim and be environmentalist? Well, I don't really see any issue that we couldn't align with them on. Maybe there are some, but I don't know of any. Whereas with feminists, maybe if we go issue by issue, it's half and half. So can you call yourself a feminist and not agree with half of it? Maybe you can. And one other thing I mentioned is that I do believe there still is this kind of pressure that if we support you, you support us, which would also make it difficult to be Muslim, a practicing Muslim, and fully be in that movement. But Allahu A'lam.
Right, it just a thought that occurred to me that like I think the reason is a lot of the times like it's sort of people make it black and white, like are you feminist or are you not? As in
Right.
feminism means do you support women or not? And then whenever you're like, well, no, I don't label myself feminist, then usually it like will have some red flags for people, like, oh, you must have some, you know, some reasons why maybe you know you don't fully support women or something like that. So I think it's more of like a word thing
Yeah.
than an actual like what does feminism actually mean, because that used to be the way I used to think. If someone said I'm not feminist, I'd be like, well, like you're canceled. So
Yeah.
you know, maybe it's just we just need to be a bit more understanding of what the words we're using actually mean.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Feminism for some people can simply mean women's rights. So if you say you're not feminist, why don't you stand up for women's rights? It is a funny thing with words, right? So in a sense, maybe superficially we could all be feminists if we believe in women's rights, right? But in any sort of deeper interrogation of the word, of its roots, of its practices, it becomes a lot more difficult to call oneself feminist. I mean, a similar thing would be if someone asks, you know, do you support Black Lives Matter? and you say no. Oh, well, you don't like black people, but you could be saying no because they support, you know, homosexuality in the LGBT community. So the reason you're saying no has nothing to do with a more superficial understanding of the movement. So you're right. It could just be a wording thing, and sometimes we're using the word differently. We have 8 minutes until 4, if you want to go until 4:30.
Just on that same point, just a quick comment. I think there's a perception, a stereotype in the society in which we live that because we're Muslim women, we're not empowered and we're somehow oppressed. And that's where that word, when there's a contradiction to being feminist, is equated with us not standing up for human rights, whereas nothing could be further from the truth when you actually examine it. So maybe that's where some of that tension lies.
And that's a really good point. That could even also be the motivation for some Muslim women to call themselves feminists, to make it clear, no, I'm not oppressed, I'm a feminist. So that's a really good point.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you as well. I'm a fan of yourself and your whole family, pretty much. So, alhamdulillah. And I just wanted to say I'm thankful to be here, not just because it was my job to be here to record and preserve and hopefully share this lecture, but also as a Muslim man, I'm also happy to see other Muslim men in the audience. Where often when you see the word feminism, you know, it's kind of like a scare term almost, and men will feel a kind of a retreat from that because there's a negative assumption sometimes. And understandably so. We have a lot of media, contemporarily speaking, that tends to show the male and especially male fathers in a very negative and absentee light. And there is a social reality to that. But when it's now portrayed as like a dominant, the guy is not absent, or males are portrayed as like the idiots in the film or unintelligent in the film, you know, you can't underestimate the impact that that's having on a generation of men. Then you combine on top of that, this gender fluidity push and this big question mark about gender. And it's like, I fear for our future, about our kids growing up in that type of culture as presented as the norm. So my point is that what it makes me appreciate is religion. And in particular ones such as Islam that I converted to, because it gave clarity to me on these issues. I really didn't even know what a man was, honestly, until being presented with it as a Muslim. And it frightened me, to be honest. Men was, you know, as a young guy growing up in this secular culture, you know, you're just chasing your desires. And Islam just shifted that dramatically in terms of this thing that you're after in a woman in terms of your desires. You have to, number one, have God's permission. You have to fulfill certain conditions. You have to have consent, and there's responsibility. And that I think that religion really offers the important thing that religion offers is a compelling force outside of the self, and that has an authority over the self. Whereas my fear with a lot of these movements, secular movements, is that in itself. There's no outside compelling authoritative force other than the self, and the self is self-serving, and it flip-flops. So you can't agree on feminism because the definition flip-flops. If I say I'm feminist because I support the rights of women, well, that's just my understanding of it, but that's not this other person's understanding. And who's the current authority of that movement? It just shifts. And so I appreciate that we have outside compelling forces, God, you know, primarily, and then these realms called heaven and hell. I appreciate the existence of heaven and hell because it compels me in my relationship with my wife on a daily basis. It's like, do I really want to oppress my wife? Do I really want to not give her rights? There's times in the relationship, yes, well, I'm kind of self-serving, but the religion is always giving me that self-check system outside of myself. You see what I mean? All the time. And so I know, okay, if I wrong her in this moment, it's not just, oh, I upset my wife. It's like, you can go to hell. You can get burnt. I don't want to get burnt. I don't want to go to hell. Therefore, you better act right. Also, paradise is awesome. So why wouldn't I want to be with this woman in paradise? If I can be with her here, why not be with her forever in paradise? So why would we want to mess that up? So it gives you like forgiveness. The gift of religion is also repentance, to say sorry. It's something compelling me to say sorry to God and also to anyone else that I've infringed upon. And so I think it's because we're also interacting in a dominant culture that does not have this higher authority belief system, it's easy for that to weaken in terms of our clinging to it and just our mere appreciation of it. So that was
No, thank you.
It's not a consistent definition. So the idea that it's not a consistent definition makes me think about, oh wait. So every time someone asks me, are you a feminist or not? I'm like, do you have 40 minutes? Because I have a lot to say. So I think highlighting the idea that we believe in women's advancement, we believe in women's equality, we believe that a woman should work if she chooses to do so. Those are the important things to do, is highlighting that. I think we got hung up on the idea of like, are we feminist or not? Why and why not? I think just understanding that idea and understanding it on a micro and a macro level, understanding what is happening in our community. Are you aware that there are many women are living in households with oppressive men, right? Or just having these discussions in the community is what really solves this thing, not just being hung up on the word feminism.
Yeah.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah. That's
Thank you so much for your contribution, and it's 4:30 and she has been talking for 2.5 hours. MashaAllah. So thank you so much for coming here, and I hope inshallah it bring tawfiq to your life and it was beneficial, and inshallah will come again and many more such interesting programs. Please do not forget leaving surveys. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.